Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 2 of the Fear, Love, and Creativity podcast series, in which we investigate the best way that each of us can get in a state in which we allow our creativity to flow, because I truly believe it is that creative flow that is our most potent power, our most potent superpower as human beings. And so we feature solo episodes with yours truly, but also incredible experts like the person I interview in today's episode. I'm talking about Randy Gage. He is the prosperity guru. Learn more about him at randygage.com. He'll give you a kick in the ass to help you unleash your prosperity. He's a 4 times New York Times best-selling author. I think he's on book number like 11 or 12. He's a Hall of Fame keynote speaker. His latest book is Radical Rebirth. It's about kind of re-emerging, reinventing yourself to unleash your prosperity. You know, today's episode may offend the hell out of you. We talk about religion and politics, but as I said in episode 1, we may offend you, but hopefully we make you think and get out of that state of fear that is holding you back. Without further ado, here is my interview with Randy Gage. And toward the end of this interview, he says, "Curt, you better release this whole fucking episode unedited and not be afraid if people get offended, because he knows we recorded something special." So I hope you enjoyed. I hope we make you think. Hope we don't offend you too bad. Actually, I don't mind if we do. Without further ado, here's my interview with Randy Gage.
All right, so before we started recording, I was talking about the idea of fear, love, and creativity, and unleashing your creative flow. And I was mentioning, so Randy, actually, gosh, this is one of the last trips I took before COVID. Yeah. I flew to Fort Lauderdale. I remember seeing a guy in a mask, and at that point, I was like, what's even going on here? Like, it's not even here yet, and I can't even imagine. But went down there, interviewed, and you started talking to me about. And we started talking. I'd read some of your books, but just about, first, I think you talked about you had been a lay minister in the Unity Church. Then you talked about Fillmore, and you've written that he was one of your most, in a list of authors and philosophers. And so I started reading Fillmore. I read everything, the big, thick book. And then he turned me on to Butterworth, and I was reading them. And Butterworth's got a book called The Creative Life. And Charles Fillmore, I was reading it. I started in February after we met. And I was reading it all as we were going into COVID era. And it's like, did he write this for February and March? And he talks about the collective consciousness willing into, and listen, you had the virus. I've probably had the virus. I didn't even know it. But he talks about willing sickness into society and the collective consciousness of fear. And Butterworth talks about the rise and fall of stock markets is not a reality. It's a reality that we all create based on our thoughts, which is true. I mean, you look at this. I mean, Elon Musk.
The stock market is just a meme. It's a virus, which we choose to accept. And we say, like today, I've got emails from my friend, our Clover stock is up 25% today. It's a healthcare company that we both invested in because they're kind of forward thinking, but it's up like, it's almost like a Wall Street bets kind of scenario. Just somebody's feeding something on a blog somewhere and it's spiking up and like crazy. And it's like, it's monopoly money. It's just memes that we say, oh yes, the US dollar is worth, because US dollar is a meme, right? Yeah. There is no gold standard since 71 or 72 when Nixon took it off the gold standard. So we say the government says it's worth this much, and as long as we accept it, that's true. But if we don't accept it, it's not true. And it's true of everything in the stock market, all that stuff. It's just conventional beliefs that we choose to participate in.
We've talked about it on my past podcast, and you've written about it in several books. Can you define, for everyone listening, who thinks a meme is just a funny picture of Trump or Biden or something or GIF or GIF, I don't know how you pronounce it. Can you describe kind of the history of the meme and how you write about it and how you speak about it?
Yes. So the term meme is to signify from the field of memetics, which was introduced by Dr. Richard Dawkins in his book, The Selfish Gene. And he created the word meme because he felt it would have the same root structure as gene. And so we have genes that influence our development through DNA, right? And then he said we have memes, which influence our development, our beliefs, our actions through mind. A meme is actually a mind virus that parasitizes the host and causes us to replicate the virus. So if you hear the Baby Shark theme song, if you got children like you do, you probably hear, oh my God, I got this earworm, and now you hum it in an elevator somewhere, and the guy in the elevator said, oh, thanks. Now that's going to be in my head all day. That's a meme. If Obama says, yes, we can, that's a meme. When Nike says, just do it, that's a meme. It parasitizes the host and causes us to replicate the virus. So it's just like the hard drive on your computer gets a virus, your subconscious mind gets a mind virus, which we call a meme.
And I've read some books or listened to some podcasts. Dr. Bruce Lipton writes about programming. And he really stresses, and he said the Jesuits had it right. Give me a child until he's 7 and I will show you the man. Or give me a boy until he's 7, I will show you the man. And talks about 1 through 7 having that software to get programmed with memes. Do you buy into that?
Behind me on that wall, you see the cover of my last book, Radical Rebirth. So as you know, because you've read it, I divide the foundational beliefs in our lives into 6 main critical core categories, meaning sex and sexuality, God and religion, work and career, marriage and relationships, health and wellness. And I would submit I say before 8 or 10 years old, but you could easily make the argument in all of those that you develop that core belief by 7. And I wouldn't dispute Dr. Lipton at all, because your parents, one cheated on each other, or they were abusive, or your core belief about marriage and relationship anchored at 7 years old. If you were raised in Sunday school in a Catholic family, your beliefs, God and religion, anchored by 7 years old, right? Yeah. So you could take all of them and say, yeah. And that's the thing that shocks people is when I'm working with them, they're saying, you're telling me I blew up my marriage or I blew up my career because of a belief I developed when I was 5 or 6 or 7? And the answer is yes, that's exactly what happened.
It's one thing I've realized, and I'd like to touch on the religion piece as well, especially, is the fear piece. You know, we decided over the last year that we didn't want to subject our kids to a programming of fear. You know, we don't shelter them, but we don't allow them to marinate in the panic porn and the fear porn and all that, right? And so we've gone places where, listen, we're going to go out on the lake. We're going to have fun. We're going to do things. I grew up with a terrible fear of heights. My dad was scared of heights and would talk about it, right? So the programming. So we let our kids climb on rocks and these things, and I'm about to have a coronary, right? I'm worried.
Yeah.
But one of the things my wife heard was, don't just repeat over and over again, be careful, be careful, be careful. It will program and say something like, pay attention. And so I try to do that. But one thing came to my attention when I posted a picture I was on the phone with my mom, and she said, just be careful. I don't want those boys. I don't want you to get hurt. That was her whole thing. And it dawned on me, I probably heard that.
There's no probably. There's no problem.
Yeah.
To this day, okay, I've told this story on one of my podcasts or YouTube, whatever. I was like 50 or 55, I don't know, but not young. 50 or 55, my mother sent me a candle for my birthday, one of those ever burn candles or whatever. So some other stuff, some, cookies in the care package. And so I call her that weekend to say thank you. And right before I hang up, she says, whatever you do, don't burn down the house. Right? And I'm thinking, I'm 50 or 55. I'm talking to my mother, and she gave me a can. She's still saying, "Don't burn down the house." But of course she did, because my mother, just like your mother, just like 99.99999% of all the mothers and grandmothers of the people who are listening to the sound of our voices right now, have worst case thermonuclear meltdown scenario syndrome. So
Right.
if they, if you scuff your toe as you're walking, my mom is going to say, "Careful, you're going to fall down and break your neck." If don't run with scissors, you're going to put an eye out. Don't poke out. You're lucky you didn't get your eye poked out. Those are mind viruses. And absolutely, we get them from our parents. I think it's Geico has just got to be the most brilliant commercial campaign now about this guy who portrays a doctor, a psychologist who helps people not become their parents.
Yes.
Oh, it's brilliant. I mean, it's just brilliant because and everyone can get that humor because everyone can relate to that. Because that's exactly what happens. We become our parents 99% of the time. Unless we're, you do the work that I'm talking about in that Radical Rebirth book, where you're actually going and saying, okay, what are my core foundational beliefs about this topic or subject? How did I get them? When did I get them? Who did I get them from? And it's shocking when you do it.
When it comes to the fear mind virus, much has been written about, we live in a fear-based culture, right? In terms of kids can't play anymore. Swimming pools are closed. There's a killer around every corner. There's these polls showing everyone thinks it's the most violent time in history. It's not, but you see every shooting within 5 minutes, and wars. I mean, World War II, all these things and violence is down and all these things. Do you think that it's just a case of us saying it's worse than ever? Or do you think it has gotten worse, fueled by we were texting, Richard Dawkins, we tweeted a couple days ago about, it's funny that Richard Dawkins talks about the meme, and meanwhile he tweets something about he didn't like Kafka's Metamorphosis, and talk about a meme. It's like there's 1,000 comments that all say the same thing. And I'm willing to bet that 80% of those people don't even know who Kafka is. They just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. Do you think social media has fueled the fear mind virus that we deal with, or has it always kind of been there and we just notice it more,
What social media and traditional media have done, both of them, they both need outrage and fear as their business model. CNN doesn't work without fear and outrage. It's just not a profitable business. Facebook doesn't work without fear and outrage. It's not a profitable business. But when you add fear and outrage, they're multi-billion-dollar businesses. They're some of the most lucrative businesses in the world because those platforms weaponize the fear, weaponize the outrage. So, little homework for you guys listening to the podcast. If you go to my blog, randygage.com, search for the article, "Don't Be a Virtue Signaler." Virtue, VIRTUE. Because we have this epidemic now of people. This is what you saw with Dawkins the other day. Somebody says or does something, and then a Twitter mob is created to show everybody who follows them how virtuous they are. Because, Kamala Harris, the vice president here in the States, sent out a tweet on Friday before Memorial Day, "Enjoy the long weekend." Oh, yeah, my God, it was a Twitter mob, right? And of course, so all of the Trumpster virtue signalers we're going crazy with that. So then all the liberals, there's always a tweet with Trump, right? So they go and search his Twitter feed, and he's got a Trump that he sent on Memorial Day weekend, which was basically a campaign commercial. oh, we're going into Memorial Day and the economy's up and more jobs and 4.2% unemployment. And, it was basically a re-election commercial. And so, of course, they all showed their virtue, like your person is less virtuous than my person. And that was the weekend I wrote started to write the article you and I were talking about before we started recording. I was home visiting my mother and her sister, who is 80 and dying of cancer, and has chosen, I don't want any chemo, just I'm going to last what I last. So that was my last chance to say goodbye to her. And it was just magical. So I had this one, we were having a cookout on the Sunday, and she's been in her, my aunt has been in her home for weeks, doesn't eat anything, just drinks Coca-Cola and takes pills, prescriptions. And the doctors told us she'd be long gone already. And so I told her, listen, I'm going to come over tomorrow and I'm going to pick you up. And, she weighs like 60 pounds. She's emaciated, I'm like, I will just pick you up. I will carry you to the car. And I'll carry you from the car to the house where we get there. And outside, and we're going to have the cookout and just get some sunshine and some fresh air. And so she's like, oh, I love that idea. So I take her out there. She eats Italian sausage, key lime pie, ice cream, brownies, cookies. I mean, just every garbage. And this is a woman who hasn't eaten in 3 weeks. And she was, putting it down like a high school football team. It was just so wonderful. And then so I go back to the hotel afterward. I've had this magical day with her, and I, open up my social media feed, and it's all the Kamala Trump stuff about Memorial Day weekend. And I'm like, do you guys really think this shit is important?
Yeah,
do you really think this is what your life is all about? So for you guys listening, if you want to read the post I wrote on that, it's called The Last Goodbye, or Your Last Goodbye. Because it's like, so long answer to, but I think the question you raise is such a fascinating one, is it weaponizes the fear and the outrage, because before you just told your neighbor about it over the fence, or you told 3 people about it at the water cooler at work. Now you got 453 people who follow you on Facebook. So when you make your snarky, clever post, you're going to get instant feedback. And it's Pavlov's dogs all over again. Just the follows and the hearts and the likes and the share are training people to do more of it. And so you have these professional virtue signalers who spend 5 hours a day. Well, they might post 5 times on Facebook in a single day. Some shaming post about, because if you scroll, if you follow the right fear and outraged accounts, you can see something to outrage you every hour. And then you can retweet it out and, talk about how evil those people are. And everybody's frothing at the mouth. And it's so what the traditional media and the social media is, they've weaponized that because they allow us to project it to such a bigger audience so much quicker.
And the interesting thing is critical thinking and creative thinking. And I think the two are related or the same, depending, on how you want to look at it, does not mean that John and Jane are going to come up to the same opinion or whatever, right? Whether it's about health, whether it's about politics, whether it's something.
Yeah, but they come to that critical thinking probably means they don't.
Right. Yeah. And it doesn't mean, and they can come up with different opinions on anything, but that doesn't mean they didn't arrive at it critically. Right. It's like, if you ask why, well, because I saw it on Facebook. Well, that's one thing. There's some things that it's kind of funny. A year ago, there's a joke I heard, and it's like, what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth? Well, give it about 6 to 9 months, and there are some things, I worked in government, And there were, when people bring up conspiracy theories, my standard answer is, listen, I worked in government at the county level, the state level, and the federal level, and no one is smart enough in there to actually carry out most of these conspiracy theories. And so that's usually my take, is just step back. Although it's been interesting over the last year, seeing some things that were conspiracy theories 6 months ago, and something that it's like, oh, that's interesting. They're putting it into law. But I think the key is perhaps stepping back, taking a deep breath, and being a little bit detached rather than knee-jerky. And perhaps that's that weaponization of, I need to have an opinion on this right now, versus I'm gonna kind of see and wait how this plays out. Like I remember the first in March, I told my wife, I said, all right, they'll lock down in Washington and Oregon, but we were in South Carolina at the time. I said, ain't no way they're shutting down the economy. We went to see Sebastian Maniscalco, comedian. We saw him March 6th. And we were talking about it. I'm like, yeah, what is this COVID thing? Like, I don't even know what it is, but they're not going to shut down the economy. 6 days later, they shut down South Carolina. And so I didn't agree with it then, but I'm thinking, wow, somebody's scared of something here, right? And I started watching TV and I started getting into it. And I remember my morning meditation routine. I was panicked specifically about one of our kids, but like, I'm never going to see my parents again. My kids are going to, we're not leaving. I remember I'm not going to the chiropractor never ended. He was, I didn't go out. I remember the first time I went to the chiropractor. I mean, what back problems are like. It was out. And I was like, I don't care. I'll get COVID. I got to go get this taken care of. I came home. I took off my clothes right away and didn't touch anything. It was like I had been in a nuclear fallout, right? And so the fear got to me. And after a while, it's like I stepped back, started looking at data, started looking at things, not paying attention to the news. You wrote about it, but that you maybe wrote about your case maybe in May. I remember you came out and wrote about it or something. It's like, okay, all right, that makes sense, and this and that. But even in the end, you and I could have different opinions on vaccines, or you and I could have different opinions on anything, but we arrive at them differently. Is the difference how you arrive at those opinions? Is that, I guess this is my long way of asking, is that the difference? You arrive at an opinion, you and I could arrive at a different opinion about something, but is the difference how we arrive there?
Well, I think the real nexus of the question you're getting to is, yes, two people can both have practice critical thinking processes and come up with different beliefs, right? I can have a critical thinking process about abortion should be acceptable or not acceptable and come to a thing, and someone else can have a critical thinking and come to the other side of whichever one I chose, right? Because everybody's going to be influenced by their mind viruses. What are the religions believe about God, death, birth, health, babies, gestation, development of the fetus, right? There's what we call facts. That's the problem you see with the whole COVID thing, is everybody, well, follow the science. If they would follow the science. No, there is no such thing as proven science. The entire premise of science is you create a theory and then you try to disprove it.
Yeah.
And when you can't disprove it, that's what we would call accepted science for the moment, until somebody else creates a new hypothesis and is able to discredit what we thought was true, right? So we thought COVID was a surface threat and everything was sterilized and everybody's running around with gloves. And then after, which is okay because we didn't know. Right? It was a virus that never existed in the world before. It made the jump, it didn't exist in the human.
We were quarantining Amazon packages for like 48 hours at one point.
Everybody,
our family,
Anybody sensible was, right? I think. Because I was listening to people like Balaji and, PhD molecular biologists, epidemiologists, people who really said, no, this is not the flu. There are people dropping dead on the street in Wuhan. 40-year-old men, 50-year-old women dropping dead on the street. They are, soldering doors shut. They are locking people in apartment buildings and welding the doors shut and airdropping in food. This is not, this could be the one. We need to take this seriously, right? So that was the prudent thing to do. That was the accepted science thing to do. And we said, so it could be a surface. What happened as it played out? We found out, it's actually not really a surface threat. It's a, airborne threat. And so it made sense. Hey, everybody should wear masks because masks are usually effective for airborne viruses. Now there's a tremendous amount of research showing that masks really didn't have any beneficial effect during all of this time. Yet, and now the CDC has said, well, the truth is people who are vaccinated, there's really no reason for them to wear a mask indoors or outdoors, right? But we still have a mask mandate on planes and airports as we're talking about this, right?
Yeah.
And the people who say, we're following the science. No, we're not following the science. Science is just another meme like anything else, right? It's our best case scenario. So our job as critical thinkers is to, what you're talking about really is self-awareness. Do you have the self-awareness to be able to go up to 30,000 feet and look down on your life from the altitude and say, okay, let me objectively look, when I see that Facebook post and I'm so pissed off, why am I so pissed off? What is the belief I have that is causing that? That person who's so irritating to me, that uncle that when I see them at Thanksgiving and we just fight like cats, what is it about that person? What do they have that I'm afraid of in myself that is triggering me to do that? That's like critical thinking to the highest power, when you can take a rational, logical thought process like that and apply it to your own beliefs and your own behaviors without getting clouded by the emotion. And, the amount of people who are able to do that is in a percent that you could count on one hand, and the fingers on one hand, So that's really the issue that we're dealing with here, is people are not able to do critical thinking. Even, if you take somebody like Sidney Powell, or that Lynn Wood, they're both high-priced, experienced attorneys who have operated in the grown-up world, very successful, prestigious, well-educated, highly intelligent, and they believe that Trump is going to be reinstated in August, that there's some, right? It's a total QAnon conspiracy theory, right? But their emotions don't allow their intellect to process that. Yeah. And it's, the woke liberals, it's just, they are so desperate to show how woke they are that they're just trolling through Twitter or Facebook every day to look for some, thing that, at some point you have to just say, well, wait a minute. Do I really, how can I stop letting people program me like a puppet on strings? And there's not a lot of people able to do that.
And, maybe part of it too is these, I was thinking last night in terms of the end of nuance, the death of nuance in our society. And the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire last night tweeted something out about legalizing child labor. Now, the way they put it was inartful, but people, including Gary Johnson, libertarian, presidential candidate, that's not very libertarian, and there was no nuance. And it's like, well, does it depend? Like, my daughter's 15. Restaurants and coffee shops can't find anyone to work right now. There's a labor shortage. Now, we could debate why and all that, but there's a labor shortage. My daughter is dying to go work at a coffee shop. They keep telling her you can't. You got to be 16 according to the law. Now, I think there's one or two who said, well, if the parent signs off, et cetera, right? There's nuance there. if a child wants to work at a coffee shop versus, a child working in the coal mines, right? Okay, so but people see child labor bad, and there's a death of nuance, and so maybe that contributes to, on both sides, right? No one likes to be proven wrong, and in a society of gotcha, when politicians, and all the data show that, they repealed mask mandates in Texas and it went down, or like you said, on planes. If a politician goes back, there's no nuance, right? And then they're attacked of, well, you were wrong this whole time. And it works both ways, right? It works both ways in terms of, and I was just thinking about that last night. Just there's no nuance anymore on.
What the word for me, the word is discernment. There's no discernment. People are not able to discern distinctions. And in the Radical Rebirth book, one of the most controversial chapters is I tell people that every time you assign a label to yourself, you're volunteering for a lobotomy. Because when you assign a label for yourself, whether it's Trumpster, Republican, Democrat, liberal, woke liberal, Christian, Buddhist, conservationist, axe murderer, any label, you're creating an identity. And for 99+% of the people, you will feel the need to defend that identity. And so once you have that knee-jerk defense mechanism in place, that's when the discernment shuts off. And I say it's like a voluntary lobotomy, because even though Sidney Powell has the brain cells to access the thinking process to say, no, there's not, the last one I heard in Arizona was there was bamboo on the ballots because they came from China. Right? Somebody like her has the intellectual capacity to filter that out, but she's turned it off involuntarily because she has identified herself as a champion to overturn the election because she believes the election was stolen. So it's no different. You and I watched the baseball game, and if you're rooting for the Red Sox and I'm rooting for the Yankees, and there's a bang bang play at first base, you will clearly see he was safe, and I will clearly see he is out, because we have confirmation bias that very few people are able to filter that out.
It's when you talk about I was looking back through your book, through Radical Rebirth, and I turned right to the page about identity. And it was interesting because I'm reading a book called The Theory of Chaos. It's written in the mid-90s. I went to a used bookstore here. I saw it, or I'm sorry, not The Theory of Chaos, the Tao of Chaos. So it mixes a little bit Taoism with chaos theory. It's by Stephen Wolinski. And I picked it up and he talks about identity and these illusions we create. It's like our own movie that we create about who we are, based on all those things. And that fear, that chaos really comes in and causes just immense fear if we think our identity in any way, shape, or form is going to be threatened or disappear. Yeah. And so, over the last year, what I found was I identify with going to this restaurant every Friday and doing that, and I identified with it. And so when you took it away from me, now I can still disagree with them taking it away, but it created such chaos and a mental anguish that one of the reasons we went on the road is to completely obliterate identity and do it. Now we went crazy. We're a little crazy, but it's interesting because I turned to that. You said that. I'm reading that book about that identity, and we grasp, right? It's I'm an identity, and you'll fight tooth and nail. Are you watching Sweet Tooth, by the way, on Netflix?
No, I haven't even heard of it.
Oh my gosh! I know you're a movie guy and show guy. I see you tweet all the time. Have you watched this? It's produced by Robert Downey Jr. and his wife. It's based on a DC comic from 2009. Everyone on the movie claims, no, the whole thing was written in 2019 before the pandemic. You gotta be shitting me. There's no way. I mean, it's about a virus. It's about a pandemic. It's about lockdowns. They show people in masks irrationally having mass. They show thermometer checks on the head. If they end up, it's 10 years afterward. If you're in a nice little, like, there's a neighborhood that's kind of like Truman Show-esque, but it's quarantined. It's a very nice neighborhood, but then they show people are riding horses and there's a thing around it. If they find out you get a shaky finger if you have it, they wrap you up in cellophane and burn you in your house. I mean, so it shows the human depravity of that happens according to fear and self-preservation, right? To protect your identity. And that's the whole theme of it. And it's a very interesting movie. Like, is this really an anti-lockdown, anti-mask movie, but insidiously so? But they're claiming, no, the whole thing, the movie was done before. There's no way that it was done before the pandemic.
Right. But of course it was, because those, I mean, you'll find that in the bubonic plague and the Spanish influenza thing in 17 or 18.
Yeah.
There is a survival fear that kicks in and causes people to do really, I mean, just think about the Japanese internment camps in World War II here in the United States. I mean, could you imagine that happening today? But back then, everybody accepted it. There was 250 million Americans who thought nothing of it, who just thought, well, yeah, I mean, they do have Japanese ancestry, and Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and they killed our guys, and we better round those people up and put them in camps and watch them. I mean, so you had doctors and lawyers and scientists and, you know, mothers and fathers and children. They were just rounded up like criminals, and because that's what happens with that survival instinct. And it's the thing people, and again, here's where discernment come in, right? It makes sense if there's 6 of us on a lifeboat and we got off the Titanic and there's 6 of us and there is 1 canteen of water, it makes sense to say we will ration this water because we don't know when help is coming. There's 6 of us, we need to survive. So there are cases where it's prudent for the government to do that. You know, a health emergency like a COVID or typhoid or whatever that you might really say, I want the government to have the power to place a quarantine or to force someone who is a open transmitter of a deadly disease into a quarantine until they can be mitigated or vaccinated or the disease passes or it's no longer infectious, right? But you got to have the discernment to say, yeah, but can we just have, you know, the governor here in Florida there was a cruise ship company, I don't remember which one, maybe Royal Caribbean, that wants to start cruises here again. And so they were going to have the first cruise that vaccinated people only can go on this cruise. And so he signed a law that makes that illegal, that they cannot check people that they've been vaccinated. So my friends, you know, all my conservative friends were like, hey, yeah, DeSantis did a great job. You know, he's not allowing them to discriminate. And I'm like, well, you know, as a guy who really kind of believes in libertarian principles, I look at that and I say, well, if I'm a shareholder in Royal Caribbean, or any of the cruise companies, which are all bankrupt or teetering on bankruptcy, and they decide, you know, the only way for us to be viable and operate is if we say we're going to offer cruises to people who only are vaccinated. I don't want a governor to be able to change their policy because that's a private business on private property. And if they say we only want to, you know, that may bankrupt the country. So just before you get all excited tweeting how happy you are with DeSantis, you claim to be libertarian and believe in freedom and private property. So, but again, where's the answer? The answer is discernment, right? Because sometimes we will say, no, the government has to take private property because we've got to build a canal, you know, the Suez Canal, or we've got to build a bridge, or you know, something for the greater good. So you gotta live by principles, but you gotta have the discernment and the critical thinking to realize hey, some of these things, there are no perfect outcomes. We're going to have to compromise some. So like you and I, we're both lean very libertarian, private property, freedom, liberty, right? But there may be cases where you say, wow, no, the guy next door to me there's a family of 11 there, and they all have Ebola virus, and they keep running out in the yard and want to play with my kids. I need the government to do something where I'm going to take out my shotgun and I'm going to kill them all, right? There's discernment.
We have that discussion here in terms of, all right, it's easy for us to say things and we oppose government actions right now. We're all in great health. Where there's certain things we have no pre-existing conditions, looking at the whatever, and people may argue, whatever. That's we've decided that. But I said to my wife, I said, what if it was like the virus from the movie I Am Legend? What if, and it's discernment, and I think backing yourself into a box, like right now, we're not getting vaccinated. And that's our choice. I love everyone who does. I don't, if there was a different scenario, like I was reading about the 1977 Russian flu outbreak, which, by the way, if you ever want to look at something, Google, Wikipedia it. Years later, they thought it was a lab leak from the Soviets. And it's like, wow, that's interesting, But that was the morbidity rate or the fatality. It was all, this is what, 82 is the average, right? Unless you have pre-existing conditions and all that. And this was 26 years and under. Could you imagine the difference in whatever? And I said, how would we react differently? It's if we back ourselves into it, and our kids were most likely to die, would that be different? And of course it would.
Yeah, you have to think of that. I mean, like my condo, they put copper on all the door handles, the elevator buttons, because copper, coronavirus can't be conducted on copper. Then they propped open all the doors for the trash rooms, the elevator lobbies, everything, so nobody had to even open. I love that. I hate it. I'm a neat, clean guy. I don't like walking by the trash room with the door open or whatever. But for this, I said, you know what? I'm okay with it, right? You have to have that critical thinking because, and I'm not one of these people, the revisionists who now let's go attack everything Fauci said or everything Trump said. No, everybody was doing the best they could with what they had to work with. And so it made sense to think, well, are masks an answer? Are vaccines an answer? Are, surface disinfections an answer? I mean, and we still don't know. Like, I've got a friend texting me, listen, I have natural immunity. I don't need a vaccination. I have less than 1% chance of, and I'm like, that's an interesting theory. It's a plausible theory, but it's a theory. Right. You don't know, do you have natural? Because he's making the case, my natural immunity is stronger and longer than vaccine immunity. And that may be true. It may not be true.
Right.
It's just a theory, right?
Yeah. I mean, and it's that way, I think, with a lot of things. I mean, there are people who think, I disagree with people about cholesterol drugs. I disagree with people about...
and there's a lot of research to show they're muscle wasters. They're very dangerous, horrible side effects. I take a statin drug. I take the smallest possible amount I can, but I'm HIV positive since 2006, and being HIV positive, I'm much more susceptible to cholesterol and its side effects, and it's shows for most people who are. And I'm like, I hate that drug, but I kind of like being alive, and this might give me a better shot to stay alive, so I take it.
And people have to understand. You talk about identity. It's like, I don't do something. I'm not going to identify by being something about a drug or a political party or something. One thing I want to ask you is, you mentioned confirmation bias. And confirmation bias and I catch myself doing it all the time, certainly, but also, and sometimes my confirmation bias I've found over the last year can be from a sense of hope of well, maybe that's the best case scenario. So, but when you pair it with discernment, so early on, there were people who, and even now when it comes to data and on some of the things you mentioned, it's like, I don't understand what they're saying here. And there's a graph here that your own government, the people you work for are putting out that is different than what you're saying, But early on, there were some epidemiologists and even statisticians. So John Ioannidis at Stanford University, who was running the numbers and saying, I think we should yield a little bit and just think. I'm not saying that this isn't bad, but I'm looking at the numbers on the Diamond Princess. I'm looking at this, and I think there's an answer other than full lockdown. Like maybe we can segment where you could do certain things, right? He was so I found myself from a personal thing looking at it, and I'm like being drawn toward his data because I wanted to believe it, right? Because it was good news.
Absolutely.
But then I saw people just openly, viciously attacking this guy. I mean, this guy, talk about one of the leading epidemiologists in the world, right? Mm-hmm. But it didn't confirm their bias. But then I'm reading it, I'm like, well, am I following it because he's confirming my bias? Mm-hmm. So in a world like that, where there's so much information and you have that confirmation bias, how do you discern? Because in a world where experts, and we've had this discussion, I mean, I was in DC and we bought and sold experts all the time. How do you discern in a world where experts have their own bias, and in a world where early on, some people are over here and some people are over here, and this guy's got a PhD and this woman's got a PhD. Do you know what I mean? It's a difficult thing.
Here's what
all adulting.
Here's what I do. One, I know. I mean, I'm an expert in human behavior, an expert because I was an addict and an alcoholic. And when you become an addict and an alcoholic, you learn how to manipulate people at a level a PhD psychologist could only dream of. You can act at a level that Robert De Niro and Meryl Streep can only dream of, right? So I've been in the deep underbelly of the beast. I know human behavior, right? As I say in the book, if I tell you, listen, if we're talking about human behavior, I was doing drug deals in Liberty City and National City and Overtown, where you know the behavior of that other person, or you go out of there in a body bag, right? So it's survival of the fittest, you make it up the evolutionary chain. That was my formative stuff, right? So I joke in the book that if you got a choice of 3 double-blind studies conducted by Harvard, Yale, and Stanford by PhD psychologists, or my gut, you better bet the rent on my gut, because I know fucking human behavior, right? Yeah. So I know that, and I know how it impacts me, and I know how it impacts the experts. So I listen to both sides. If you look at my Twitter feed and who I follow, people are like, wow, I see you follow Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. You must be. I said, well, do you notice that I also follow and I list 15 Republicans, right? Or 15 libertarians. And you know what I mean? So I had literally yesterday, I was texting my friend, okay, hey, Dr. Shah is saying that it's not true that natural immunity lasts longer than vaccine immunity. What do you think of these, right? So I'm getting from both sides. And then I'm also filtering it out, like, okay, what is the vested interest of this person and what is the confirmational bias of this person, right? So when I'm like right now, I'm in this deep dive into the blockchain, cryptocurrencies, the DeFi, DAOs, and NFTs, because I think this is the most important development in human history for the next 20 or 25 years. It's going to impact all areas of our society more. So, and so at this point, by spending an hour or two a day on it for a long time, I know more about it than 98% of the world, right? Which means I'm just smart enough to be dangerous, right? Because the 2% who know more than me know so much more at such a deeper level that they could, because I'm not a programmer. I'm always looking at everything from the human behavior angle. Like, okay, why is somebody buying a crypto punk for $8 million at whatever auction house? Why are people buying Gary V's tokens? Why are people, I'm looking at all of that, the NBA Top Shot NFTs and all of that. I'm just looking at the human behavior angle. And so I'm listening to every podcast, reading deep dive stuff, white papers on programming, and I'm not a programmer, right? But I also look at, okay, so yeah, he's talking about NFTs and he's a trader in the NFT market. So he does have a confirmation bias toward that. Oh, he says Ethereum is better than Bitcoin. Well, but he buys NFTs and they're built on the Ethereum chain, so he's going to be biased for that. Oh, he says Bitcoin is better, but he's already admitted he's got 95% of his portfolio in Bitcoin. So he's conflicted, right? So that's where the discernment comes in, is you've got to filter through all that stuff. And then again, there's no facts, there's no science. There's, okay, based on the evidence I have, I put out this hypothesis, I've tried to disprove it, and this is where it's taken me. And so so I've been working on that's going to be my next blog, is going to be on Web 3.0 and all of these challenges and opportunities we're going to face with DAOs and NFTs and cryptocurrency. And I'm trying to look at it from the prosperity standpoint, right? Because again, it's how do you filter it? What is the prism that you're looking at? Because if you own Dogecoin and you bought it at 4 cents and you got someone who wants to buy it at $50, well, you're a big proponent of Dogecoin.
Right.
I look at it and I say, what is the problem it solves? There is none. What is the value it adds? There is none. So this is anti-prosperity. This is just gambling. This is no different than going to Wynn Las Vegas and putting money on the blackjack table, right? So you've got to think about that. So I'm trying to look at all this stuff from, okay, but where is the prosperity going to be created? Where is there because there's tremendous value with the blockchain. There's tremendous value with cryptocurrency. Our business, you and I as speakers, we're going to love NFTs because they're going to allow the smart contracts and they're going to allow royalty. They're not there yet, but they're getting there. So value is being created. And by the way, I could make the same argument, and that's one of the things I was writing in that blog today, right? If we say, okay, let's take all the arguments against cryptocurrency. It's just a meme. It's made up. There's nothing to really support the value of it. Could be used by criminals. Only guilty people would want to have privacy. Children or unsuspecting people may be victimized by it. There could be pyramids in there. That's all true. And that's all true for the US dollar.
Right.
And the pound and the euro and the yen and centralized finance and banks and all of that, right?
Yeah.
So now you have to say, okay, so now I need to be a little more discerning. It is true. And then we could say, now, the truth is the regulators, most of them don't understand crypto. They're always going to be behind the criminals. So there is a bigger chance of getting victimized in crypto, probably than the US dollar. Dogecoin was started as a joke. It's a literal joke, right? So, but Elon Musk, who's obviously the 800-pound gorilla in the space, he put out a tweet and said, well, if they speed it up by 10 times, if they increase the inventory by 10 times, if they lower the cost by 100 times, this could turn into a viable crypto coin. And I say, well, what has a better chance that the US government is going to balance the budget and be physically sound, or that the developer community around Dogecoin will make Dogecoin a legitimate currency? And I'd have to bet on the Dogecoin people,
right?
Right? So you have to think of it that way, that, wow, there is, you got to really double click on this stuff. You got to be discerning. And then I think of that, well, of course, but Elon's biased because he was accepting Bitcoin. He bought cryptos. He's got his part of it in his Tesla or his, personal portfolio. So he's got a confirmation bias, but he's also a really brilliant man, one of the most brilliant people on earth. So you got to filter all that stuff in.
Are you okay on time, by the way?
I am. Yeah.
So I'd like you talked about the weaponization of fear and outrage. One thing that I've been using, and if I stole it from you, I'll pay you the royalties. But maybe
this is where we need NFTs for the royalties.
There you go. Is the weaponization of guilt, and the whole guilt piece. It's and when we started, I talked about reading your prosperity series and having our chat, and then going into Fillmore and going into Butterworth, and the more I go, it's amazing. And looking even something as simple as, you got me, I went over and started reading the Aramaic version of the Bible. I started getting into the gosh, I'm going to sound like an idiot, but the hidden books of the Bible. What is it? The Hag Hammurabi or the Nag Hammurabi? Okay. I think I pronounced it wrong. But and you go into these, and they have completely different translations, right? And you've talked about the definition of sin. It's not you're a bad person and going to burn in hell. It's that you're missing the mark, right? And just that one definition changed a lot in my head of how I look at things, and started looking at things differently and reading about it. And
let me jump in just as an example of this. So I just flew to a location I'm not going to disclose last weekend to work with a corporate consulting client. And I can't say anything because they would embarrass them to death. But they have a name for this company, and they chose it because it means a certain thing in Latin. And a positive benefit, it's expressed in Latin. Okay, great. Because I was saying, you sure you want to keep this name, this brand? We could do a fresh canvas. Well, no, this means so much because this word in Latin means. So me, I'm like, well, I'm going to go Google Translate and I'm going to check on this, and it means nothing. It's a complete made-up word. It's not a Latin word. So I got the actual translation of Latin, and then I just double checked Greek and Roman, every possible thing. Like, what am I missing here? And the answer is, it's like the guy who gets the Chinese character tattoo on his arm that he thinks means peace, but it says "fuck you" or something. It's like, so. When I'm telling these people, your entire corporate culture, which you built on this Latin word, is not even Latin. They're just blown away. So it's the same with sin in the Bible, right? It's a meme. Everybody accepted the meme. Oh, sin means bad, guilty, horrific, all of those connotations. And I just say, well, what language was the Bible written in? Oh, it was written in Aramaic. So let me check Aramaic and see what the definition of sin is. I was doing softball tournament in Birmingham, Alabama. And I'm going back to the airport, and the sign says, "Welcome to the Birmingham International Airport." I say to the taxi guy, "International? Who flies to Birmingham? From what country?" Like, I don't know. So I check in at the counter. I don't know. She asked the lady next to her. She don't know. She asked the next guy. They don't know. They call a supervisor. He doesn't know. It takes 9 people. Then I finally find out there's a code share flight from Atlanta to Birmingham on Delta, which is a code share with Aero Mexico. So that makes it an international flight and the Birmingham International Airport, right? It's just check the premise. Nobody ever checks the premise. I like to check the premise.
Well, and you know, the past year I've been reading more. I'm reading Taoism, and I'm reading a book now by Jason Gregory, who I think is going to be interviewed for this podcast series. I did a call with him. He's got a series of books on Eastern philosophy. They're wonderful. And he's Australian, and he lived in Thailand for years. And he's describing, he's got a book, his latest book is called Fasting the Mind. That when you start getting anxious and you start getting this, it's almost like to clear out the memes. Fasting the mind.
The mind. Okay.
The mind. So it's traced back to Taoism of just, it's meditation, but they have I think it's called the Vipassana, where you 10 days with nothing and you just,
Okay.
But he's describing these in Sanskrit, and these and it basically I'm not going to repeat the Sanskrit words, but it's like your programming influences your thoughts, which influences your habits, which influences your actions and the results. Well, it's interesting because you're reading this, and actions, the word for action in Sanskrit is karma. And he goes into the fact about how Western society has led you to believe karma is something akin to what we think sin is, which is knock on wood. I did something, I had a bad thought. Yes. And it kind of is, but it's more in terms of every action has ripples, right? I throw a pebble in a pond that has ripples, not you throw a pebble in a pond, they're going to ripple back to you and kill you and you're going to burn in hell. I mean, that's what we think of it as.
Right.
And it dawns on you, and you look at the history of, and I'm sure, well, I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear if, and maybe I'm thinking about the earlier version of your book too that I read on the religion part. It'd be interesting to hear the feedback you get back from people who are on team whatever, right? Who can't discern. And you look at the history and the politicians getting in bed with the churches and creating the rules to keep people docile and doing certain things. And I always joke that, I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic school, did the whole thing. My dad went to Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame fan. We moved away from the church a couple of years ago. I was on my parish council, right? And I always noticed that anytime this current pope would give an anti-market speech, there'd be a Vatican bank scandal. It'd be interesting. Or pass the hat. Make you feel guilty and pass the hat. Notre Dame's $50,000 or $60,000 a year. That's not poor people, affording that. And so there's a variety of reasons that keeping people feeling guilty can, I think, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, contribute to fear and keep them from actually going out and being creative. I mean, but this, maybe that's a meme. There's other memes too. I mean, I talk to people, I want to start my own business, but so-and-so came and said, how could you do that? What are you going to do about health insurance? You're not going to have a health insurance card. You're not going to have this and this and this. And it's almost the same thing. It's like, well, I feel guilty. I'd be hurting my family. I'm selfish if I do that. If I go out and I live a creative life. Is this a planned thing? Is it just human nature in terms of creating this guilt? Is it people in cahoots?
I believe it's turned into human nature because of memes. That they have programmed enough people in the general population that has become a frequent and common characteristic of human beings. I don't believe it was. See, I have this shocking, what I have identified, what I think is the most shocking development in human history in the last 200, 300, 500 years, is that the human being today evolves more from memetics, from mind viruses, than they do from DNA, from genetic disposition.
Yeah.
So if you sat down in a chair for 20 minutes with your phone turned off and just thought about that for 20 minutes, you would say, holy shit. This is the most mind-boggling, alarming, cataclysmic thing that nobody in the world seems to be thinking about. But now that Gage said that, if I really think about it, in other words, we have thousands of years worth of programming. Hunter, gatherer, survival of the fittest, the people who weren't smart enough to run away from saber-toothed tigers didn't make the gene pool, they didn't make the cut. This is, what we see today is the evolution of, thousands of years of survival of the fittest and evolution. And then you say, and then, I don't even want to say names because that would be mean, but I mean, pick 15 public political figures, government, and say, this is the result of that 50,000 years since Homo sapien, because it's not. What you see now is the result of 50 years of media amplifying mind viruses. So when, if we started a meme in 1940, it might take 6 months to go around the world. Mm-hmm. We can start a meme in 2021 and we can have it around the world in 48 hours.
Yeah.
So when we watch America's Got Talent or American Idol or the Simon Cowell, that's American Got Talent, and all of the judges have their Dunkin' Donuts cups on their desks, that's a meme. Dunkin' Donuts is paying a lot of money to create that meme that I love Blake Shelton and Blake is drinking Dunkin' Donuts coffee. Well, no, that's probably not Dunkin' Donuts coffee that Blake Shelton is drinking in that cup, right? There's probably a different explanation for that, right? But that's a meme that we can create. And so 10 million people watch that show and 10 million more online, or 50, that we can create a meme that goes, if something happens there is one of those moments in a presidential debate or a moment in a talent show like American Idol or Miss Universe or the Grammys or the Oscar, Super Bowl, World Cup. How many people watch the World Cup? A final, there might be 2 billion people on earth watching that in 100 different languages. And something happens on that pitch, it could create a meme, and we could infect 7 billion people or 5 billion people with a meme in 30 hours or 48 hours. Cool. You couldn't do that in the 30s and the 20s and the 1800s and the 1700s and in the BC days and the 100 AD days, because we didn't have the platforms to amplify that stuff and weaponize that stuff.
Yeah. Well, Randy, I want to thank you for doing this and coming on. I know you've been on a few times before. I don't know how I'm going to release this. I'm doing this podcast miniseries.
You better not do all your chopping up and editing and take out all of these things that are going to frighten people talking politics. You better release this fucking thing from start to finish, unedited, because if you do, I think this will be one of the most fascinating, enlightening podcasts that people could spend. And we've been going a long time. How long have we been going?
A little over an hour, yeah.
And change, yeah.
I don't care what people, it's like someone might say, "Oh, you just gave your vaccination status." I'm like, people are going to hate me, they're going to love me, and I love everyone. I mean, I don't, it's not, I don't, people probably, in your book, you probably get, I don't know if you get pushback from people who are on team religion or something who push back because you're pretty blunt about it. And, I said some things here. I'm going to get, my Catholic friends, "Oh, could you say that?" It's like, okay, I don't know what to say. That's my opinion. It's there came a time when our daughter, who was probably 13 at the time, would come back with questions from Mass or from Sunday school, and I could no longer justify my answers about it.
Yeah.
And part of that was not just the religion jersey being taken off, right? The identity, It was
the identity that you feel the need to defend.
And it was political because for years I was in Republican land. Yeah. And so when it came to being a Catholic and marriage, there were certain things. And then I started going like, wait, what? How? I can't tell. I can no longer I can't justify this. And I was speaking out of identity and all these things, and the type of thing that like, you're going to go to hell. And it's still in the back of our head. I'll drive by a church and I'll be like, what if I'm wrong? Oh, I'm going to hell. And then I kind of sit back and I think, and I read a lot of Alan Watts now. And he was an Anglican minister, and he describes the history of why churches are the certain way and why they created like an old courtroom and the judge, and why they've created the anthropomorphic God who judges you. And then it's like, wait, maybe I should actually read the gospel. And, Jesus wasn't killed because of his power. He was killed because he was a nonconformist and a conspiracy theorist. Yeah. And everything he said was, your rules suck. Yeah. And yet somehow they twisted that into more rules.
Right.
So,
people, what I hope I make clear in the book, and I tried really hard to do that, and I had some good feedback to do that from my friend Alan Weiss. I sent him an early proof, and he was like, he sent me back the most scathing email, because him and I have that kind of relationship. Yeah. He said, absolutely, I will never endorse this book. This is a screed against religion. You're doing exactly what you're accusing religion of. And he was absolutely right. And he, in my defense, the religion chapter, he had the one I just cut and pasted from my blog. It hadn't really been sorted out where I was like, okay, listen, no. I just want you to, I didn't want to be judgmental about it. I was very judgmental in my younger days. And so I had a track from an earlier blog that I just cut and pasted that was very judgmental. And that didn't serve me. It doesn't serve the reader. And fortunately, I've evolved since then, and I can present it in a much more rational, non-judgmental way. And so what I've tried to do in the book or my podcast is say, I'm not, because people think I'm like I get people say, we want you to take Christopher Hitchens' place. We had the four horsemen of the apocalypse, Dawkins and Sam Harris and Hitchens and Michael Shermer, I think, are the four militant atheists, they're called. And I'm like, I'm not a militant atheist. I call myself a fundamentalist agnostic. Yeah. Because I don't know. I just don't know. Yeah. But I question the sanity of people who think they do know things that they cannot know. I'm fine to have this place. So what I try to do in my work is say, it's just my job to get you to question the premise. And if you question the premise and you decide that you are a devout Christian or a devout Buddhist or a devout Muslim, wonderful. Right. Then I've done my job. Yeah. And if you decide it's not serving you, those beliefs, wonderful. Then I've done my job. But I don't have a dog in that fight. I don't have an axe to grind. I just want to, I want you to know, are you being controlled by a belief that you learned at 6 years old that you never questioned the premise? And is that influencing your job, your work, your health, your marriage, your everything?
Yeah, and if you want to test all of this out and the weaponization of guilt, leave a religion that your family is very entrenched in, leave a political party that you've worked in for decades, and it was like I was killing myself, my family, letting the country down, letting the world down. And it's so interesting how if the things we talk about today, right, and certainly there's a way you can write about it and talk about it, right? But even if you just say, I left the Catholic Church because of this, or I left its church because of this, people immediately, they have no problem judging. It's not a two-way street. And sometimes by just saying, I chose a different path, that becomes so threatening to them Like we'll tell people, we're traveling the country right now, right? We don't have a home. All our possessions fit in a minivan or a 5-foot thing. And people ask us, what are you doing? We tell them, and they get defensive. Oh, well, I could do that if I would, but here's why I can't do it, and this and that. And we're like, cool. We didn't say you had to do it. Homeschooling. They immediately feel guilty. Well, that's wonderful. I would homeschool, but we both, and I'm like, that's cool. I didn't. Or I left the Catholic Church. Well, I didn't. I'm not judging, man. It's like, but that you can tell it's that identity, and there's a layer of guilt there that they're doing something I want to do, and I feel so I'm going to justify it by I'm done. And it's like, if you feel the need to get defensive, maybe investigate that a little bit.
Yeah, whenever you see emotion driving that, why does every alcoholic demand you drink with them? Right? Because they don't want to acknowledge their alcoholism. So if you just say, oh, no, thanks, but I don't drink. I mean, it's like you're drowning kittens in front of little children. They attack you for not having a drink with them, right? It's somebody who quit smoking. They're going to, become evangelical. Well, no, you don't really, why is that? Why do you have those emotional triggers that you feel the need to? And it isn't, there were two great examples you gave. One was leaving a religion, one was leaving a political party. But it's like I talk about in the book, if, how many people are dentists because their father was a dentist, their grandfather was a dentist, and their great-grandfather. And they never took 3 minutes to think about, would I rather be a painter or a dancer or an accountant? It just never even entered their mind. And so I called the book Radical Rebirth because in my case, as probably 5 or 6 times in my life, I have killed off the old version of myself and created a rebirth. And I give myself permission to do that. And that's what I think everybody has to do. People's like, I was in your seminar in 1996 and you said the opposite of that. I'm like, great. That's the thing about the mind. If you don't change it once in a while, you're probably not using it, So if you tell me that I'm saying exactly the same thing I said in 1996 in my seminar or my book, then I've got a serious problem. What am I still doing on this planet? Because all I'm doing is taking up space. Yeah. I'm amazed how ignorant I was 3 weeks ago. Right? I'm just, as I'm doing this deep dive into crypto and web, I'm like, oh my God, because I could spend a couple hours a day on this, and a couple hours a day after 3 weeks, you've gained a lot of knowledge. Okay, that's the equivalent of 6 months of a college course in something. So that's what the journey of life is all about. It's growing into the highest possible version of yourself. And you can't do that if, the reason why, people say to me all the time, how do you come up with these ideas? Joe Vitale accused me of being an alien. He said, you have to be from another planet. How do you even think of this stuff, And Lornette wrote me the other day, and she's my assistant. She said,
I met her last year.
Lornette. So she wrote me an email the other day after she read my Friday philosophy. And she's like, there's a lot of people who tell me that you are an alien because you just talk about stuff that nobody else in the world ever talks about. And and I think, so people say to me, how do you get these ideas? How do you come up with these ideas? And I think the reason so many people can't have new ideas is because they can't let go of the existing ones they have. They can't let go of them. So they have the idea that they're a Democrat, or they're a Republican, or they're a Buddhist, or they're a Bitcoin enthusiast, or they're a whatever. They created that label. They got the identity. They've got to defend the identity. And that's like, it sucks all the oxygen out of the room for any other ideas, any other beliefs, any other, evolution of you as a person. And that's what we all have to fight against, because entropy is a real dynamic. There's a reason it's called the comfort zone, right? It is comfortable, right? But nobody on earth ever had a breakthrough in their comfort zone, and you won't be the first. Right?
Yeah.
We're only going to have our breakthroughs when we challenge ourselves. And that means challenging our core foundational beliefs, questioning the premise, just like I did. Like, okay, so what language is the Bible written in? Let me check that language. Oh, they say this means that in Latin. Let me just check the translation. Because and this is not a mom and pop company doing $50,000. This is a international company doing many, many millions of dollars in sales. And their whole, I don't even want to say anymore. I'm gonna get in trouble. That happens. People just accept the karma thing or the sin thing. They just, hey, this is how it was. This is how the idea was presented to me, and I've never questioned it. Why would I? Everybody says it. Everybody says it's true. That's the way everybody does, right? And that's why Uber was started by people who were not in the taxi business. Amazon was started by people who were not in the bookstore business. Airbnb was started by people who were not in the hotel business. And this is if you look through all of the breakthrough entrepreneurial things, breakthrough medical, scientific things, and 9 times out of 10, you see it's from people outside the space, because they don't have that incestuous thinking that's so prevalent within the space.
Yeah. Well, I hope today's episode caused people to question a lot of things. We may get some interesting questions once I release this. But Randy, you can find all of Randy's daily blog posts. How long have you been doing daily blog posts for?
Well, now I'm at the point I do them when I have something to say.
Okay.
That could be 5 a week. It could be 1 a week.
1 a week. But randygage.com. It's great. Follow him on Twitter. He's a prolific tweeter. I was off Twitter, but I don't know if I told you this, but I got back on based on our discussion on the podcast.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I saw you came on shortly after that.
Just in terms of I'm going to use it. I'm going to use them like they use me. The interesting thing, though, was even though I had, right before a discussion, I went off it, but before I went off it, I had deleted all my followers. They still delivered me stuff as if I hadn't deleted my followers.
Really?
So now leaving it and coming back on, it's really a blank slate. I mean, they would deliver me promoted stuff or things you should know that were based on old habits, I guess, or people. So now it's a blank slate. I'm following people.
Twitter knows more about you than your wife does.
Yes. And now Amazon, I think, too, it's getting there. But, well, Randy, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Hey, this was a great, fascinating discussion.
I agree.
Bringing me on.